We are 528 days in, no plans on going anywhere.
Tonight, one camp calling for the search of Winnipeg area landfill stays up, while the other one comes down.
We've been split up between jurisdictions, and those political ridings aren't serving in our best interest.
A proposal for new riding boundaries in the Yukon is causing some concerns for First Nations there.
We are responsible for our lives, like Riel believed, that we are self-determining and that we can self-govern ourselves.
And the Métis Nation Saskatchewan announcing a new plan towards self-governance. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Winnipeg, where a memorial camp set up near downtown in remembrance of a slain First Nations woman and calling for a landfill search for her remains has been closed. Camp Mercedes went up near the Canadian Human Rights Museum in July 2023. It was named after Mercedes Myron, one of the 4 women murdered by an admitted serial killer. Organizers said their camp would stay up until the Prairie Green landfill, where the remains of some of the killer's victims are believed to be, was searched. Last week, Camp Mercedes announced on Facebook they were closing down. No reason was given. Searches have yet to start, but the provincial government and federal government have contributed $40 million to cover costs. An organizer for the other camp at the Brady landfill says they're staying put until both sites are searched.
We have no plans on going anywhere. Our goal from the very beginning, December 18, 2022, was that our camp will stay in place until the landfills, and when I say I'm speaking plural, so I'm speaking of Brady as well, when the landfills are searched and all of our women are brought home. Once that happens and the work is complete and my cousin is laid to rest properly, we will then look at putting that sacred fire out. But for right now, no, we are 528 days in, no plans on going anywhere.
An RCMP constable has now been transferred from a remote community in British Columbia after he allegedly posted racist remarks on his Facebook page. Members of the Heiltsuk Nation first reported seeing the posts on the Facebook account of Constable Adrian Robinson, who was stationed in Bella Bella. In one image, he's sitting at a table with a British flag and writes, quote, "Now what's to be done about these pesky natives stirring up trouble in the colonies?" In another image, Robinson is seen in an afro wig and appears to say, "Black and proud, and where's my pick home?" After a rally outside of the detachment, the RCMP announced the Constable Robinson was being transferred out immediately. Marilyn Slett is the chief of the Heiltsuk First Nation.
We face racism on a daily basis as Indigenous people of color. But it does not mean we need to tolerate it in our community by guests in our community.
An electoral commission in the Yukon is proposing some big changes for the territory, and that includes reducing 2 rural ridings by merging them with other ridings. While one First Nation welcomes the suggested change, others are concerned it leaves rural communities without effective representation. Here's Sarah Connors with more.
The Casca community of Ross River is located in southeastern Yukon and is home to the Ross River Dene Council. It's separated from the only other Casca community in the territory, not only by distance, but also by an electoral boundary. Ross River is one of 5 communities in the Pelly-Nizzetlan riding, most of which are geographically distant from each other and include non-Casca nations. The only other Casca First Nation in the territory, the Liard First Nation, is located some 360 kilometers south in the Watson Lake riding.
We've been split up between jurisdictions, and those political ridings aren't serving in our best interests.
But that might soon change, according to a new interim report by the Yukon Electoral District Boundaries Commission. The commission is required to review existing electoral districts to ensure effective representation in the Yukon Legislative Assembly. It suggests merging the territory's 8 rural ridings to 6 and increasing Whitehorse's 11 ridings to 13 to account for the city's population growth. That includes merging Ross River with Watson Lake to form the Yukon East riding. The new riding would better reflect the two communities' shared land and interest.
Well, it's a benefit if we're together in that riding, then we could share our values and see some of our common interests move forward in a meaningful way.
But the proposed changes could significantly affect the Vuntut-Gwitchin riding in the fly-in community of Old Crow in northern Yukon. The riding is the smallest in Canada, with just under 200 voters. The commission states the riding creates electoral unbalance because of its small number of voters. It suggests merging the riding with the riding for Dawson City, around 400 kilometers south, to better balance the vote. Yukon NDP MLA Annie Blake, who represents the riding, said in a statement to APTN News, "It's important that people in my community get a chance to look at the Commission's interim report. There's a lot to consider as the Commission continues its work, and I'll be listening to what people in Old Crow have to say." But a retired clerk for the Yukon Legislative Assembly says the proposed merge could have consequences.
In the last general election, I think there were about 8 times as many voters in Dawson City as there were in Old Crow. So the likelihood that anybody from Old Crow is going to get elected or perhaps even nominated is going to be very low.
McCormick worries reducing the number of rural ridings will cause people living in communities, especially rural Indigenous people, to feel underrepresented in the Assembly.
But I think it's something that the members of the Legislative Assembly have to consider, is that what is the legitimacy of the Legislative Assembly to rural Yukon if the representation from your rural Yukon keeps going down?
The Commission is holding public hearings on the proposed changes in Yukon communities until mid-June. Its final report will be released in October. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The Métis Nation Saskatchewan withdrew its support for Bill C-53 in April, which recognizes and affirms the Métis right to self-government. Earlier this week, M&S announced a plan of their own they hope will move them toward self-governance. M&S is saying their, quote, sacred document of the Michif is a critical step toward reconciliation. Saskatchewan video journalist Rachel May has more.
We are responsible for our lives, like Riel believed, that we are self-determining and that we can self-govern ourselves.
Dubbed Kistja Mashin Icon Ostja Michif, the sacred document of the Michif was unveiled earlier this week. Métis Nation Saskatchewan President Glenn McCallum says the document has many purposes.
It's anything from family, strengthening families through different distinction-based programming, on-the-land learning. It can be any economic development, health, education, and the list goes on.
Unlike the failed Bill C-53, the sacred document is focused solely on Métis citizens in Saskatchewan. All registered MNS citizens will have the chance to add their voices to the document. McCallum says this is the foundation of keeping Métis people strong.
Reconciliation is on our shoulders, not them. It's not the province, it's not the federal government, it's not industry or institutions. You know, we left it to governments previously, and look at where we ended up, where people lost their identity, culture, values, and language.
MNS citizens will be called to ratify the document this coming fall. The goal is to have it added to revised federal legislation by early 2025. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
MPP Saul Mamakwa's speech in Oji Cree in the Ontario Legislature this week was historic. Our Truth in Politics panel is here to share their thoughts after the break. Welcome back. NDP MPP Sol Mamakwa made history this week when he spoke OG Cree in the Ontario legislature on Tuesday. Previously, only English and French were allowed to be spoken at Queen's Park. Other Indigenous politicians have spoken their language in the halls of colonial powers, but it is pretty rare. For more on this, we're joined by our weekly Truth and Politics panel. Jennifer Lewitz is a policy analyst with War Shield, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, how did you feel watching Sol Mamakwa speaking OG Cree, the first Indigenous language to ever be officially spoken at Queen's Park?
I thought it was really powerful. I think this really shows us that, you know, the bridge between Indigenous people existing in politics is starting to widen. And we're starting to have those conversations around these, you know, typical colonial systems that are now not being infiltrated, but our people are representing themselves. And I thought it was really strong how he said that, you know, he almost felt that he couldn't shake the fact that he thought he should continue speaking in English because he thought he was doing something wrong. But really what he was doing was paving the way for so many Indigenous people behind him, especially our youth, to feel comfortable embracing their own language and potentially getting elected one day and feeling comfortable being in these spots.
Negon, your thoughts on this historic speech and the reaction from those in the Ontario legislature as well?
Yeah, what impacted me the most is his mentor and supporter, Barb Nolan, longtime Anishinaabe speaker, has spent decades just tirelessly working for pennies, if not for free, to save the language amongst our people. And to hear her, the proudness that she had in the speech immediately following was just remarkable, very heartwarming. The one thing that I would say is that, you know, this is something that the infrastructure really had to come up quickly, and they had to make sure that there was supports to be able to enable this speech to take place and for it to be translated, which kind of reminds you of the problems with some of the legislation involving Indigenous languages, particularly C91, in that there's a real funding gap issue in that while it's nice to say, oh, Indigenous people should get services, should be able to deliver speeches, should be able to access government resources in our languages, the infrastructure really isn't there. And it takes a real heavy lifting, a lot of people to be able to do this. I myself have been in courts in which elders have given testimony, and then all that's given at the very end of the transcript, because they don't have transcribers or translators, is spoken in Ojibwe. Meanwhile, remarkable teachings were given in that courtroom in that day. And I think that may be something that in the future people would want to think very deeply about when we incorporate languages. But at the same time, it's a really important moment, and I don't want to take away from what Jennifer said, which is it always takes a first. When a first walks in a room, which is people like our generation, our parents' generation, those of us, Jennifer and I, are still in many ways the first. Our job is to open up that space for those who are coming behind us, and we have always done that as Indigenous peoples for our young people. And I'm very proud to say that it's seeing it today.
Jennifer, we have seen some others speak their language, particularly in the House of Commons. Robert Falcon Ouellette in 2019. Romeo Saganash had said it should be a right. Do you think that this might have an impact on those that are looking to run for public office?
I think it will. You know, you still have a lot of Indigenous people across Turtle Island that aren't, you know, super supportive of our people running in those institutions because they feel that it undermines their sovereignty. And I'm in 100% in support of the people that feel that way. But if our people do want to get involved, you know, whether it be federally, provincially, municipally, we need to make sure that we are doing what we can for that inclusion piece to make sure that our people feel comfortable being in those spaces. You know, if you grew up speaking Cree or you grew up speaking Michif or whatever it might be, maybe that's how you best communicate. And maybe English is your second language, but you're, you know, a Dene speaker from Northern Saskatchewan that wants to enter politics. We need to make sure that we're leaving as much inclusion open as possible for our people to enter those spaces and feel comfortable speaking to their issues in their own language, because they're not just speaking to the English and French Canadians, but they're also speaking and representing their own people as well.
And Yukon, you mentioned the court system. Mamakwa called on other jurisdictions to start doing this as well. Do you think we'll see more, and what should be and could be done to incorporate Indigenous languages and practices into the halls of colonial powers?
Probably the best example is international forums where you go to the United Nations, for example, or you have a committee meeting from an international summit, and you'll have kind of a wall of translators in which people are working in different languages. And think about South Africa. South Africa has 23 official languages, but they're regionally recognized. In Canada, we only have one non-European language that's recognized. It's Inuktitut in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. And so as a result, you have to offer that service. You have to offer that consistent translation, so presence and access to that within government services translations. So what we're looking at is probably a regional representation within Canada, the different aspects. So for example, Anishinaabe Cree, Anisinu or Oji Cree here in Manitoba, maybe even Dakota, Lakota, Nakota. The fact is that regionally you need to be able to offer those supports. What does that look like? It looks like resources, time, energy, and commitment, which is something I think if there's anything that we know only comes from lobbying, reminding, and then also making sure that Bill C-91, the Indigenous Languages Act, that says that Indigenous language is a right, that is actually enforced and that it actually has energy and time put in it. And I'll just add one more thing to what Jennifer said, that for us to encourage more Indigenous participation within the political economy of this country, all of these big strides that have been made with the Liberals, there have been some important strides, C-15 particularly, Indigenous rights coming in concert with other Canadian law. Those can be easily removed by government, easily. C-91, C-92, child welfare legislation. When Indigenous peoples get involved in Parliament, speaking our languages, advocating for our own perspectives, this is the way that we make sure that those laws stay on the books and make sure that they are advocated for. It's absolutely a good argument to say that we are sovereign nations, but we're also in partnership with Canada. And so making sure that these big strides are not just simply reversed by the next government that comes in.
Nia and Jennifer, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, miigwech, thanks.
And I will note that if you're in Winnipeg tonight, there will be a book launch for Nigan's new book, Winnipeg Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Centre, happening at McNally Robinson at 7 p.m. Winnipeg time, being hosted by Sheila Rogers. You can also watch online on the McNally Robinson YouTube channel. Still to come, previews of this week's APTN Investigates and tonight's season finale of Nation to Nation. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. APTN News' very own Sarah Connor shared this close-up of her hairless cat named Yoko. Yoko seen here enjoying some springtime Whitehorse sunshine. If you'd like to be our next photo of the day, you can send your pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at your Friday weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 21 in Fredericton, showers, and 19 for Halifax. 17 in Kuujjuaq, showers, and 8 in Nain. 23 in Montreal, a rainy high of 24 in Val-d'Or. Sun's out in Sault Ste. Marie with a high of 22, 23 and sunny in North Bay. Showers and 21 in Thunder Bay, 22 with rain in Sioux Lookout. 16 with rain for God's Lake, Thompson, and the Paw. A sunny high of 22 in Winnipeg, 20 with showers for Dauphin. 19 and rain in Regina, showers, and 18 in Saskatoon. Rain and 15 for Meadow Lake, 12 with rain in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, showers and 7 in Fort Chip, 18 and sunny for Grand Prairie. Sun's out and 17 for Edmonton, 19 in Lethbridge. 16 in Vancouver, 22 for Kamloops. 16 in Prince George, showers, and 13 in Smithers. 17 in Old Crow and Whitehorse, 19 with rain in Mayo. Showers and 10 in Yellowknife, sun's out, and 20 for Wrigley. +1 in Sax Harbor, rain and 3 above in Paulatuck. +1 for Chesterfield, 3 in Whale Cove and Arviette, -5 in Resolute, 1 below with snow in Igloo Lake. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a look at what's coming up on the last episode of Nation to Nation for the season.
Coming up right after the news, I talked to Ontario NDP MPP Saul Mamakwa about his historical day this week in the Ontario Legislature and the urgent actions needed in First Nation communities. NDP MP Charlie Angus joins me to discuss the federal government's relations with Indigenous peoples and his time on Parliament Hill, as he's recently announced he will not run for re-election. We'll also talk to Chief Peter Wesley about the desperate need for a new hospital for the Cree communities on James Bay in Ontario. That's on Nation to Nation in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Annette. Stacked looking season finale there. Well, the Vancouver Parks Board evicted the unhoused residents of Crab Park last month, and award-winning video journalist Rob Smith was there. In the days leading up to the eviction, he visited the site they were supposed to move to. Here's a preview of tomorrow night's APTN Investigates.
While getting coffee, I meet Doug.
So what was your story, Doug? Why did you end up on the street yourself?
Because of COVID, couldn't pay the bills anymore. And girlfriend was an addict, and it just wasn't working for me, and found myself living in a tent.
Why do you keep coming down here?
To check on my friends that are still homeless.
He's housed and employed now. Doug introduces me to Lynn Thompson.
I'm from Treaty 4. I'm an Ish. You wish you were an Ish.
And Makita Martin, two well-known figures in the downtown east side. The trio gets me behind the fence as they inspect the brand new setup.
These are $500 tents.
You know, any place you reside, there are rules.
So, just to be clear, you guys are that this is a favorable situation.
Oh, absolutely. Do you think so?
This way, it's safe.
We had 29 residents, and only 6 have moved over.
I'm concerned about whether or not these new bylaws are going to stand up in court.
The board convened to vote on amendments to its bylaws. Residents fear the new rules grant extraordinary powers of search and seizure to park staff.
There hasn't been consultation. We didn't get any of these papers that they gave out.
In the end,
all in favor? The motion is carried unanimously.
The episode is called Wrecking Crew, and you can catch it tomorrow night right here, right after the news. We'll also speak with Rob Smith here tomorrow night on the newscast, fresh off of his Canadian Screen Award win this week. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and be sure to join Creason here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for your first look at the news. I'm Dennis Ward. Merci, miigwech. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.